Hello class, today we're going to talk about classifying organisms. And before we can really get into it, we need to know why that's important. So, why do we classify organisms? Classifications organize living things into groups so that they are easier to study. So scientists do this to make it easier for them to really study the organisms that they're looking at. And this whole process is called taxonomy. So as you can see here, there are many different levels of classification. And if you just go right down the list, the highest level of organization is the domain. And then within the domain, there are kingdoms. Within kingdoms, there are phylum or phyla. Within a phylum, there's classes. Within classes, there are orders. Within orders, there are families. And then each family has one or more genus and species. The more classification levels that two organisms share, the more characteristics that they have in common. So two organisms that are in the same family would have more in common than two organisms that are only in the same kingdom. Or two organisms that are in the same genus would have more in common than two organisms that are in the same family. So really, as you go down this list, you get more and more characteristics in common. And one easy way to remember this level of classification is this little phrase, did King Philip call out for good soup? So it would be a great idea to pause this video, write down the levels of classification, and this little phrase to remember each one, because as you can see, the letter corresponds with the level of classification. You can always think of King Philip up on the roof calling out for good soup to his servants. That'll help you remember all the different levels of classification. A man named Carolus Linnaeus, who was a Swedish naturalist, came up with a system of naming organisms that we still use today, and that system is called binomial nomenclature. Binomial means two names, and once we get into this, you're going to see that we really use two names to name each organism that we know of and each organism that we're discovering on Earth. So to use Linnaeus's system, binomial nomenclature, we add a organism's genus and the species together. So you might look at this picture of this little kitten and just call it a cat because that is the common name. But its scientific name using binomial nomenclature would be Felis domesticus. And as you can see here, the first letter of the genus is capitalized, and the first level of the species is lowercase. That always has to be that way. So the genus is capitalized, the species is lowercase. And these kind of funny looking words actually are Latin. So the binomial nomenclature naming system, the genus and species, all come from Latin derived terms. So on this screen, we have the classification for the American black bear. Up at the top are all of your different classification categories, that whole taxonomy that we've been talking about this whole time. And on the side over here are the actual categories that the black bear falls into. So I want you to pause the video and try to come up with the correct binomial nomenclature for this black bear. Remember, binomial nomenclature should have two names. So figure out which two categories you want to use and write them down and see if you get this correct. Okay, so hopefully what you have written down or what you thought of was that the black bear should have the name Ursus americanus, because that is our genus and our species for this animal. And remember, genus is capitalized, species is not. All right, hopefully you understand a little bit more about how we classify things in science And tomorrow in class, we're going to be using a lot of this information in an activity that we're going to do. So if you're confused, watch the video again. If you're still confused, write down any questions that you have, and we'll go over all of that before we start in class tomorrow. See you later.